Good evening, Demon fans, and welcome back to the Demonland podcast. My name is Andy, and we've retaken top spot with the help of the Swans after our spirited on-the-road victory over the Power from Port. It's the 10th week this season. We have ended the round on top of the ladder, a feat that has now well surpassed the last season that we won a premiership. Joining me tonight, long-time Demonlander George. Good evening, George.
Good evening, Andy. Good evening, everyone. We've also consulted for this week Dr. Norman Swan about Andy's MFC SS condition, and we'll report on that later on.
Well, thank you. I'm looking forward to that. Hopefully it's curable. Also joining us tonight, Demonland's statistical analyst and positivity coordinator, Binman. Good evening, Binman.
Good evening, Andy. Good evening, George. Good evening, Demonlanders, and Adam as well, Super Mikado. I remembered to take my mute off then, so I'm well pleased to start on a positive note.
I was just about to jump in and tell you to unmute because I was looking at you. I
did wait a beat just to let the pressure build, but...
If for some reason I can't control it, I don't know why. I should be able to unmute you as the main host. Tonight we also have a special guest host returning to the Demonland podcast. He is the author of the classic horror story, The Great Depression, that all Melbourne fans of the future will be telling their kids as they tuck them into bed. He's the man behind the awesome repository of all things Melbourne Football Club at demonwiki.org. He writes a lengthy weekly online blog at demonblog.com. You can follow him on Twitter at demonblog. He has a new book, The Last Hurrah, chronicling the season where we last sat atop the ladder for a good chunk of the year, ultimately taking out the premiership. Demonlanders know him as Super Mikado. Welcome back to the Demonland podcast, Adam Woolcock.
Thank you, gentlemen, and it is lovely to be here on this auspicious occasion where we have recaptured top spot on the ladder. It's amazing enough to get it once for the season, but to lose it and recapture it again, what a time to be alive.
Yeah, it's a really good feeling. I must say that during the year, so many times I've just taken out the phone, opened the AFL app, just had a quick squiz at the ladder, and when we lost it the other week, I couldn't bear to look at it. So it's good to be able to do that again. Now I know how Hawthorn fans feel, and I feel dirty just talking about that. Now, before we go on to talk about the glorious victory away from home, deep in the bowels of enemy territory, let's have a chat with Adam about his new book. Adam, you've obviously done a deep dive into the golden era of the Melbourne Football Club, having lived through a good chunk of the darkest days and also written that book that I mentioned, The Great Depression, about the drought. How jealous are you of those successful years that you've been researching?
Well, all the time that I put into reading about the great Norm Smith era, and not only as a coach but also as a player, because, of course, of the 12 premierships that our club has won, he was involved in either player or coaching in 10 of them over a 25-year period. So it does make you a bit jealous reading that. But fortunately, what we also get into the book, it's not all about 1964. It's actually about 1964 and the aftermath as well. So you can stay grounded when you read the book because the first part of it is great, and then probably the last 25% of it will be sending people rushing back to their therapist, especially if they have memories of those days, some of the great false starts and rugs being pulled out from under the club in the late 60s, the 70s and the 80s, right through to the 90s. So it's got a balance. If you're into that old school misery vibe of the Great Depression, this has still got something for you. But if you want to read about some of the greatest teams ever to play the sport, culminating in that amazing 1964 grand final, won by a back pocket player whose coach wouldn't actually let him go across the centre of the ground, that's in there as well. So it's doing really well at the moment, and it's just a great feeling to be doing it professionally this time. It's being done through a publisher, Hardy Grant, who do a lot of the footy books, and they've got it out in a lot of the shops at the moment now. So it's a big difference to the homemade version of the book that I was doing last time.
Legendary journalist and Dee's supporter Mike Sheehan wrote the foreword to the book, lending further gravitas to the subject matter. How did you go about landing someone of Mike's calibre?
Oh, I've got to say that was an entirely inside job from my publisher, who has a lot of contacts, and he was able to secure Mike to do that. And he wrote a really great foreword. He played under Neil Crompton at Werribee, so he's got a bit of a double connection to the great the man who kicked the goal to win the grand final.
I heard you talking on radio about Neil Crompton and that goal, and as you mentioned, he wasn't allowed to creep into over the halfway line. You mentioned that he copped a bit of a spray from Norm Smith for doing that, even after he won us the grand final.
Yeah, absolutely. Norm Smith went and gave him a spray in the change rooms afterwards, and it's said that he never actually forgave him publicly. They never spoke about it again. And so both men went to their grave without ever resolving that between them, which is just remarkable, because you think most coaches would say you shouldn't have done that, but ... But Norm Smith was so on his strategy and how he wanted things to be done. He told him not to go across the halfway line, and he tried to get the trainer to run out and stop him from going across the halfway line when he could see what was about to happen. But he was unable to forgive that greatest sin of all, which was going against his philosophies and the way he wanted the game to be played. But I think from the rest of our perspectives, we're all quite happy that Neil did that, because who knows what would have happened otherwise. And obviously in later years, he was called out to recreate the goal, and he almost kicked it in his 60s, I think he was, when he got called on to have a shot at it from the MCG, and he cracked a bit of a funny, and he said, if the ball wasn't flat, I would have kicked it. So obviously nobody except Norm Smith holds it against Neil Crompton, and it's probably, I don't know, you guys chip in, but is that the most famous goal in the history of the Melbourne Football Club? I would think it would be.
Boys?
Hunt's goal, but with the Titanic, must be up there in least recent times.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, obviously there's a lot of goals that don't get shown, and probably one of the most famous ones was Jason Dunstall at Cardinia Park in 1987. And there's probably another famous one involving Hawthorn and affecting Melbourne in 1987 that we won't talk about. But for actual goals kicked by Melbourne players, I would be struggling to find anything that reached that level, because even back in the day, grand finals barely ever went to under a goal. There's so few grand finals in that period beyond the First World War that were decided by less than a goal, much less ones that Melbourne played in, that it really was one of the first real thriller grand finals, especially the first one after television and the first one after, there was the mass media of the game, that even though the game itself was probably a very scrappy game, the finish has become legendary just because, it was one of the first ones that was seen by such a large amount of people.
I'm pretty sure we spoke about this with you on one of the podcasts we did a couple of years ago, that I think the D's have never won a game after the siren or with the last kick. So it really takes there really isn't anything that we can compare to, because we haven't sort of won with the last kick of the day. Yeah,
and I think without having it at hand, I think all the other grand finals, probably the 1900 one against Fitzroy, just because scores were so low, would have been within a couple of goals that game. But none of the other grand finals in the classic Norm Smith era were won by under a goal. There was, of course, the draw in 1946 that got the replay in the first place. But apart from that, I know all our other grand finals were won comfortably. And, of course, all our grand finals since 1964 have been lost comfortably.
I think I'd prefer to win very comfortably. I don't think I could handle a grand final.
The question. Would you rather be a St Kilda fan and have it dangled in front of your eyes like it was twice and pulled away? I think at the time, obviously, the ball goes a different way and St Kilda have won a premiership. But looking back on it 10 years later, you almost prefer to have been thrashed in a pair of grand finals than to have it go so close and have it torn away from you.
Oh, absolutely. Did you get to interview any of the surviving players from that era personally?
Yeah, yep. I was very lucky to be able to do that. The author of the Red Fox, Ben Collins, he was very helpful in giving me contacts with a few of the players, and Brian Keneally, who played in the team, he was very helpful in giving me the contacts of a lot of the other players. So I, off the top of my head, I wouldn't have them all, but I spoke Brian Keneally, John Lord, Hassan Mann, Robert Miller, Kerry Rattray. There was quite a few that I was able to speak to, both players who played in the game and players who watched from the stands. And obviously they've got a different perspective of it. One of them took a young lass to the game who was a Collingwood fan, and she obviously at the end, when things got exciting, she forgot whose guest she was and was jumping up on the seats and screaming for the pies. And there's just these little things like that I don't think have ever been told before about that game. Obviously the Red Fox book goes into Norm Smith's life in a lot of detail, and that's a really great book. But that 64 is just a part of that whole story, whereas we really, really get into it and get into I won't say the minute detail, forensic details of it, but just the stuff that's never been told before. Like Frank Davis's sister was in the paper. She was a Collingwood fan as well, and she was in the paper saying, "I hope he goes well, but the Pies win," and things like that. And an old Margaret Court coming out as a big D's fan before that game in the papers and things like that you just don't hear about anywhere else. So I think it's a good, concise encapsulation of that 1964 season, but it's also got a lot of interesting stuff that you don't hear about from beyond, from the fall after the sacking of Norm Smith as well. And in comparison to the Great Depression, because it's been properly published by a professional publisher and edited and everything, it's very concise. It's not too long, so that people will find that's a pretty easy read.
If you put your sci-fi hat on for a second and jump in your time machine, and if you could go back to any moment in history to witness any of the events that you've researched, or any of the games or grand finals, or just any of those happenings and funny anecdotes of the MFC throughout history, which moment would you be jumping back to witness?
I think for quality purposes, you'd have to go back to the 1956 grand final, because I think without being able to compare to those machine Collingwood sides of the late 20s, just because there's no footage of them, it is really likely the greatest Australian rules football team that ever played in that 1956 grand final in front of 110,000 people or whatever it was. For sheer comedy value, I'd probably go back to the 1900 grand final, where Melbourne only qualified because it was a slightly generous final system where all 8 teams made the finals after the home and away season, and Melbourne finished 6th. And the Fitzroy fans were so certain they were going to win, they already had carriages outside the ground with Fitzroy Premiers 1900 written on them. And Melbourne upset them, and that was our first VFL premiership. But just for comedy value of letting the Fitzroy fans know about their ill-informed cortege outside the ground, I think I'd have to pick that one. And then for a completely random one, there's one we mentioned in the book, the infamous Dennis Jones season as a coach, where he lasted one season. Some ridiculous results. That was the season we lost a game by, I think, 141 to 203. Defence was apparently just out the window that season. And towards the end of the season, there were some people handing out leaflets saying he should be sacked. And that was one of the games we surprisingly won. And Dennis was pictured, or was captured by a journalist in the rooms after the game, throwing the leaflets on the ground and stomping on them in anger. And of course, the people with the leaflets they got it right, because 2 weeks later he did get the sack. But I would love to go back and see Dennis jumping on leaflets in the locker room after a win.
What year was that, Adam?
It was 1977, I'm going to say.
So it's before St. Elves?
1978, actually, yes.
After St. Elves?
Yeah, yes. Yeah, so Dennis Jones took over from Bob Skilton. So 1976 was the year that Melbourne was just tragically kept out of the finals by all they needed. They needed to beat Collingwood and consign Collingwood to their first wooden spoon, which they did, surprisingly. But from a modern perspective, Melbourne needed to do something and they did it right. But all they needed then was for Carlton, who were top of the ladder, to beat Footscray at Princess Park. and those two somehow managed to have a draw. And I'm not suggesting any impropriety, but those two had a draw which tipped Melbourne out of the finals. And I'm told by someone who was at that game that day that after the Melbourne fans had taunted Collingwood by throwing wooden spoons over the fence during the game, the Collingwood fans got theirs back by actually singing the Carlton theme song at the Melbourne fans when the scores came through. And then Bob Skilton had one more season, got the sack, and that's when Dennis Jones came in after that. And he only lasted one season, which is pretty remarkable these days. Like, you don't get, even back, especially back in those days, you didn't get many coaches who only lasted one season. And then, of course, it went Carl Dittrich, Ron Barassi, John Northey, and through we go to the present day.
I must ask you if, considering you've done a lot of research into Norm Smith, the Norm Smith curse, are you a believer in it? And if
no, I'm not into your mystical aspects of it, but I think what it does is it explains just the general feeling at Melbourne, what Paul Roos gave light to as the veil of negativity a few years ago. It's not a curse of Norm pulling the strings from beyond the grave, because, of course, the two other sides he was associated with were Fitzroy, where he player-coached after leaving Melbourne, and South Melbourne, who he coached after leaving Melbourne. So
where are they?
Get there, but Brisbane and Sydney have both won premierships since, so I don't think...
Not for a long time.
Yes, exactly. But so I don't think Norm had the finger on the button from beyond the grave to them. So it's more just encapsulates the general feeling of almost despair at following Melbourne, that are we ever going to get there? And even seasons like this, you just mentioned the famous Melbourne Football Club supporter syndrome. It's that feeling that, what could possibly go wrong? I don't think it's a weekend at Bernie's style thing, but it's definitely that feeling that, something's got to go right for us one day, but how long are we going to have to wait?
Well, one might argue that those two teams had their souls ripped out, have gone interstate, had their identity stripped, and then were able to win premierships after that. So maybe
maybe Jeff Kennett, when he was trying to send us to the Gold Coast 15 years ago, maybe we should have listened.
Perhaps. Boys, you got anything you want to ask Adam?
Yeah, I just had a question in terms of when you're in the sort of research and deep dive into that period of 64, and I guess you went back a bit too, what sort of similarities, if any, do you see to this current team, and also, I guess, the sort of support staff and coaching staff and the general, the footy club? Is there anything there that's sort of similar that you see?
Well, there actually is a similarity in the forward structure, that Norm Smith was never a big one for having one key forward that kicked the bulk of the goals. He was always into spreading the goals around, which is why throughout that era, you really don't get any Melbourne players, who kick more 50, 60 goals a year. And so that's probably one similarity now. I'm not sure that's what our current coaches want to happen. I'm sure they would be quite happy if someone was kicking a ton of goals. But where we are at the moment, as we saw on the weekend, the goals are being spread amongst a number of players, which is probably a more sustainable way to go about it, unless you've got the really top-level full forwards playing at their best. It's probably a better way to make sure that you're going to get those goals every week, is to have them spread across the team. It was definitely a Norm Smith philosophy that he really, even Barry Burke kicked sort of 45 goals in his rookie season the year before, and his role as a goal kicker was de-emphasised in 1964. He was still a really important player, but they just wanted to spread goals around and make sure that there wasn't one person that could be switched off.
I've got a mate whose dad played for the D's in that era in the reserves team, and my mate reckons that his dad was a fair player, but it was a rover. And one of the striking things about that team, though, was just how hard it was to get into the ones, how deep they went across both teams, and their second team could, be pretty competitive against most other teams. Was that your sense as well from what you're...
Yeah, absolutely. Like, there's a lot of players that played, handful of games here and there. Also, the under-19s did win the premiership that year, but the funny thing is that they didn't really kick on the under-19s from that season. Like, you don't see barely any players that that played in that under-19s premiership team on the same day as the 64 senior premiership go on, which I guess it just shows you where things started to go for Melbourne once the recruiting changed and once the country leagues were carved up via a ballot, which happened around this time. That it just made it so much harder to rebuild that team because it had been rebuilt several times. Like you had the core pillars of that team, your Ron Barassis, your Frank Adams, players like that, Brian Dixon, but a lot of the other players were just bought in and out over the years, and they found like Graham Wise as the ruckman, who probably wasn't a first-choice ruckman at the start of the year, but he became really important, and a Frank Davis who only came in halfway through the season and held his spot because of injuries and then did very well going into the finals and winning a premiership in his first season. It was really difficult to get into that side, and people who got in really had to take their opportunity. But it was a year also where there was a lot of injuries, and that's one of the really things of merit about this side. They had to battle like so many injuries during the year, and they didn't play. They played well. I mean, a top four is you could win a lot of games and miss the top four. I think someone finished 13-5 a couple of seasons before that and actually finished fifth and missed the finals. But they were 2 weeks to go. They weren't any guarantee of playing finals, Melbourne. And Hassaman kicks this ridiculous goal from the pocket at Glenferrie Oval to win a game there to confirm their final spot and avoid having to play for it at the Western Oval the next week. And then a series of results just goes all in their favour, and they end up finishing top of the ladder. So not only getting the double chance, but getting another minor premiership. And, of course, they go on to, spoiler alert, smash Collingwood in the semi-final, go straight to the grand final. Almost fall victim to Collingwood's great comeback in the grand final.
Adam, do you think the loss of Barassi was underrated? Obviously, there was a lot of contention around the coaching situation and the committee situation, but we seem to forget that Barassi disappeared at the same time, who was such an influence. Yeah,
a couple of the players said that to me, that just no one grasped the opportunity to step up and just be the leader on the same level he was. Like, they had some great players still, and Hassaman was a really good captain for the rest of the time he was there. But it did leave a void. And I think where you look at the start of 65, where they won 8 games in a row to start that year before it all went horribly wrong. But a lot of those games it was almost like this year in that a lot of the games were not convincing victories. They turned it up to smash Barassi in their first meeting with Carlton, but it was probably a false dawn, those wins at the start of 1965. A lot of players have mentioned to me they just think there was a void after Barassi left, and in conjunction with the Norm Smith sacking, which was said to me just took the air out of the place. And then the third thing, in conjunction with the changes to recruiting, which meant they weren't able to keep the team topped up like they had before, all that just contributed to coming together and just causing the air to just go out of the place. And over the next couple of years, they fell out of finals contention and back towards the bottom of the ladder.
Have you been taking extensive notes of the 2021 season, and if so, will there be a sequel of sorts if the Demons manage to reward us long-suffering supporters with a premiership this year or in the next few?
Well, maybe we'll wait 50. I'll wait another 50 years for when this one's a memory. But it will feel a bit weird to have a book called The Last Hurrah if it's doesn't turn out to be The Last Hurrah. But that isn't a problem I'm willing to tackle when it happens. I'll offer to go around to anyone's house with a texter and change the title if they need. As long as it ends with us winning a flag this year, I'll do anything to make it right.
It's a real pity that there isn't a lot of footage or hardly anything, if any at all, of that era because it would be so nice to see a Last Dance type documentary about that era, but there's just, you don't have enough footage in terms of playing footage to be able to do that justice.
Well, even the 64 grand final, we are lucky to have 15 minutes of a newsreel that shows all the goals, but there is no copy of it that's ever been found. There's 2, I think 1962 and 64 are the only post-1960 grand finals that there is absolutely no footage of, or no full game footage of. So we're lucky to be able to see all the goals on this newsreel, but you do miss a lot of the because we got to Crompton's goal. There was still another couple of minutes to go, or another minute to go after he kicked that goal, and there's a lot of action in the Collingwood forward line. And probably one of the things you do see on the video is a contentious potential free about 20 metres out directly in front, just as the siren goes. But you do miss everything else in that game. You don't see anything other than these goals that are in this 15-minute newsreel that you can see on YouTube. So it was really interesting to fill in the gaps, talking to players about that and going through the old newspapers and finding out things that happened. Like, for instance, Barry Vagg, he told me just after, basically from the next centre bounce after Crompton's goal, he actually found himself storming towards goal. Obviously, there was no 50-metre line at the time, but he found himself storming towards goal, and he actually thought, do I have a shot or do I just kick the ball out on the full? Because at the time, kicking the ball out on the full was only a throw-in. There was no free kick yet for the kicking out on the full. So he actually made the decision to kick the ball out on the full in the forward pocket, rather than give Collingwood the chance to rebound and go in the other direction. And that's the kind of stuff you don't see on the newsreel. And when you go back later and you read the newspaper reports and they talk about that, they say, he kicked it out deliberately in the pocket to waste time. And of course, it almost backfired because from the throw-in, the Pies went forward and almost kicked the goal to win the game. But it's just amazing little things like that by today's standards just seem like ridiculous. Like, not only did he kick it out of bounds deliberately, he kicked it out of bounds on the full deliberately, and it wasn't even a free kick. Whereas now you could basically look at the line and you get a deliberate free paid against you.
Terence Langley says in the chat room that Barry Burke marked in the back line after Neil Crompton and kicked the winning goal.
Yeah. So that's the irony. You've got a defender who won the game forward, and then you got a forward who went back and saved the game in defence, and he obviously became a very good defender later, Barry Burke. But he was really important in saving the game as well, because the game had already gone. You'd had the Ray Gabelich, the big run, where he kicked the goal to put the Pies back in front. So you had the game swung that way in their favour, and then it swung back to Melbourne in Crompton's favour, and then it could very well have swung back to Collingwood and they would have won the game if Burke hadn't taken the mark, the free kick had been paid, and effectively they would have kicked for goal after the siren. Speaking of kicks after the siren, Collingwood would have kicked after the siren to win the 1964 grand final, which who knows which way that kick would have gone. But either way, it would have been a pretty dramatic finish, because I'm almost certain there hasn't been another grand final where someone's kicked to win it after the siren. But obviously the umpire did the right thing and didn't pay it. And we got away with it and won that flag. And, surely there'll be many more to follow.
Where can our listeners purchase this book, The Last Hurrah, and also your previous book, The Great Depression? Yeah,
well, this one's in bookstores. I'll say all good bookstores. That's always a worrying one, because people they might not have it in their local bookstore, but it is certainly at most Dymocks branches, and it's at all the readings branches around town. So if you go online to either of those websites, they'll be able to tell you what shops have them. But if you just want to buy it online, best thing to do at the moment, just head on to demonblog.com and just click on the front cover of the book, and it will send you to a link on the Hardy Grant, the publisher's website. And what that does is that shows you all the online companies that have got it. So you can pick if you want Amazon, if you want Booktopia, your choice. Get the best deal you can. So just go into demonblog.com and you'll see the cover of both The Last Hurrah and The Great Depression. Obviously, The Great Depression is only available from Amazon because it's a print-on-demand book, but you can get them both through there.
Adam, we don't really want to give too much credit to Amazon. I mean, Jeff Bezos is floating around in space, courtesy of all the people buying these books.
Yes.
So the local publishers and book stores will be much appreciative of the custom being provided to them.
Exactly. And look, I haven't got a list of all the independent retailers that have got them, but I'm sure, more than sure, they'll be happy to order it in for you if they don't have it already.
I've just got one last question, Andy, about the book. You mentioned that there's video of all the goals from the 64 grand final. Is that sponsored by Haynes Paint?
No, sadly not. I think this might have been sponsored by a Mitre 10 or something.
I must say, when I did put in Last Hurrah into Amazon, a million books called Last Hurrah are in there. So make sure you do find the right one.
Yeah, look for Norm Smith.
Yes. Also, do you want to plug your Twitter and your Demon blog and the wonderful Demon Wiki?
Yeah, so I'd hate to be typecast for just doing all Melbourne things, but gee whiz, it's becoming quite obvious. So you can follow me on Twitter at demonblog. Go to demonblog.com for the weekly match review. And if you're into the historical stuff, demonwiki.org. That's where we've been compiling research for about the last 12 years on all things, literally all things Melbourne Football Club. So that's a really good one to get into. If you just look down the left side of the screen, you'll see some random pages, and that can get you going on topics and players and coaching figures and anything else, games that you might not have thought about before. So demonwiki.org is the place to be.
And can I just say, for anyone who's not been there, any Demon fans listening tonight, and I imagine it's only Demon fans that are listening, if you have not had a look at Demon Wiki, I encourage you to do so, because it's just awesome. It's just amazing. You can lose yourself in. I've done it many times, just lost myself for hours. There's just so much incredible detail, and particularly going back to some of those seasons in the 70s where, pretty bleak time for me as a Melbourne fan. But, some of the games I can't even recall. You go back and go, okay, yeah, I can remember the player, and it's just an amazing, incredible resource. And I think I said when I last spoke to you on the podcast, actually, that I was, the club hopefully is supportive of it. They weren't super supportive back then, but are they more supportive now? Or
no? Well, look, we don't really have anything to do with the club on it, to be honest. Like, they have been in the past, like really good when I had a lot more time in my life, letting me come in and go through the archives and scan photos and stuff like that. So yeah, they certainly have been in the past. And at the moment, look, they just every time there's an obituary or something, I sort of look at it and go, yeah, I know where that came from, which is cool. Like, I got no problem with that whatsoever. They're more than welcome to scour it for information wherever they need. But yeah, we're certainly not having weekly meetings about it or anything.
It's just a fantastic site.
Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate that. It's really come a long way in the last sort of 12, 13 years since I was trying to cheat on an SEN quiz and was trying to look up the answer and found the Blueseum, which is the Carlton version, and thought I can do this, and did my own version of it.
Excellent. Well, we wish you all the luck with this book, and hopefully Demons fans and Demon Landers get out and support you and buy this book. I would love you to stick around and chat about this fantastic win that we had on the weekend. So let's talk about the current era of the Demons. In fact, let's talk about this most recent game. And at the start of the round, there was a lot of angst amongst Melbourne supporters, myself most definitely included, that we could end up the round in 5th spot. Only those fully vaccinated against MFCSS would have been able to foresee through their fuchsia-coloured glasses that we would end the round on the top of the ladder as well. Not only that, but putting some extra breathing room to the possibility of going interstate for a final. And thank you to Sydney and St Kilda. And if only Carlton had kicked straighter, we would have pulled off the perfect heist on the weekend. A few weeks ago when we did our mid-season review, I made at least 20, I think actually I probably made about 40 ladder predictions with various permutations, and not one of them will come to pass based on the results of the past 2 weeks. So, there you go, ladder predictors. Super Mercado, you're the engineer of past season Bradbury plans, and for those of us who are unfamiliar, it relates to Australian Winter Olympian gold medalist whose opponents fell over before the finish line, and enabling him to sail over and finish first. Super Mercado's Bradbury plan for the Ds always relied on other teams losing in order for the Ds to make the 8. Now, we really should make the 8 this year, despite it still technically being a mathematical possibility for us to drop out, I think. Is there a current day Bradbury plan, or are you concerned about a reverse Bradbury plan where we are the unlucky sods getting our legs pulled from under us in the run home?
Well, even I, who have been accused of being one of the most negative and doom-saying supporters of all time, have put the top 8 Bradbury plan to bed. I'm not even considering that now. But now your options are, do you want to go with a top 2 Bradbury plan or a top 4 Bradbury plan? Because they can obviously be different. The Bulldogs losing to Sydney was good for a top 2 plan, but it then brings Sydney into the picture potentially to have a good run at the top 4 as well. So at the moment, I'm only playing with the top 4 plan. So it always helps if we win, but you can always have a little look on the other side and get excited when someone loses that it helps us out. For instance, if you were still playing the top 8 Bradbury plan before this week, you would have been punching the sky when Gold Coast beat GWS because Gold Coast is no threat, whereas GWS are a potential top 8 side. Now, as I said, I'm not looking that far down the ladder anymore, but potentially if Port Adelaide loses to North Melbourne in 2 weeks' time or if they play them, we'll be going, you go North. What a great team, because they don't have any effect on us, but it will actually help us. So again, the Bradbury plan is open source. People can do with it what they like, but you've just got to consider that what's good for the top 4 might not be good for the top 2. So at the moment, I'm looking to the top 4 and just making sure that your Ports, your Geelongs, your Bulldogs, Brisbane all go down. But then in a couple of weeks, if Sydney get a run on, we might need them to lose a couple of games as well.
Because I'm a bit more positive than you and Andy, my version of the Bradbury plan immediately came to mind was, well, it wouldn't really matter if Sydney finished 4th because it's in all likelihood that game will be in Melbourne. Maybe they'll make us play it at Ballarat.
As long as we don't finish
that
5th.
Would be
as long as it's not because we finish 5th. That's the thing. That's what you got to be careful of. Which I don't think is going to happen, but neither did the 3 people ahead of Steve at the Winter Olympics. So, and of course, the Bradbury plan was born in 2017, probably the greatest season for this kind of thing of all time, where we ended up getting in front at the final turn, then stacking it ourselves. So let's hope let's hope this year is the peak of the Bradbury plan, where it all works in our favour and we do the right thing and just make what other people do a non-factor.
Exactly. You keep winning and there is no Bradbury plan.
Correct.
George, when you submitted your match report, you asked me if the win had alleviated some of my angst or my MFCSS, and I answered that all it did was heighten it, as we seem to bring our best to the top 8 contests and then we drop our bundle against the Hawthorns and Gold Coasts that we're facing off against in the next 2 weeks. George, why can't I just enjoy this ride?
Unfortunately, Andy, as I said, I've spoken to Norman Swan about this, and it is in fact incurable in your case. We just can't seem to help you, despite the fact that once again we've beaten a top 4 side in the competition. What's more, we did it quite convincingly. It's going to be interesting for us this round. We've just spoken about the Bradbury plan, but the easiest Bradbury plan is just to keep on winning. I remember in that ice skating race, there was another bloke called Apollo who fell over in that, but I think he went on to win 3 more gold medals in that same Olympics. So even though things might seem to be going badly at certain small points during the whole event, he was the one who walked away with 3 gold medals, and Bradbury had the one, and that was probably his last claim to fame, I suppose. But when we look at it, I can understand why people are really concerned. I mean, the reality is that we, even when we were in grand finals in 1988 and 2000, quite honestly, is there anyone here who thinks we were the best side turning up on those particular days? We certainly had a lot of young, keen, capable and very skilled players, but when you look at the Essendon side and the Hawthorn side that we were up against, they were monsters. And the difference is this year that we're the ones that everybody's chasing. We're the ones who've beaten all the top 4 sides. We're the ones that have beaten all the serious games. And I think that's going to be the basic difference for this. And I think that's going to hopefully by the end of the season help Andy's problem out. I'm hoping it does. It'll be really joyous if he really gets over this. But yeah, I think this is our year for good reasons. This is the best Melbourne side that certainly I have seen or heard about since 1964, and probably Adam can tell us more about the 88 and the 2000 games and what he would have thought, though what we're up against in those years. But this year we're doing it for ourselves.
I've got some bad news for you, though, Andy, because Norman Swan also said in that discussion with George that it's MFCSS is like cold sores. Once the herpes remain in your body, that's it. They're always there, just ready to come back out as a cold sore on your lips. So,
as I said last week, we can win the premiership, but then come the Marsh series the next year, I'll be worrying about that. So it never goes away. Adam, how are you coping with our success this year? You know, you're on that negative side. You've got the valid negativity like I do. How are you coping with it this year?
I'm worried, but I'm trying desperately to be positive about it and hope for the best. Funny you say about you'd be stressing out even if we won a flag at the start of the next year. I always thought that the one-shot vaccine for this kind of thing would be to win a flag, but I remember we belted the Bulldogs halfway through that next year after they won a flag, and I was driving home and listening to people on the radio, and there was a lady who rang up and she said, "I've never been so disgusted. I walked out of the game." And I'm driving along, almost crashed my car because I'm driving along thinking, you swine, you've waited 50 years for a flag and now 10 weeks into the next season you're storming out of games. So I'd like to think, and I'd like to find out that I would take to it a lot better than those people. But I think at the moment my problem is just lack of frame of reference. Probably that when have we ever been this good at this part of a season before? Like even 2000, we sort of got on a run towards the end of the season and shot up the ladder from there. 98, we had a mid-season dip and we sort of had to come hard at the end of the season there. Are we talking 94? I think we started well in 94, didn't we, and dipped and came back in. So it's just really lacking that experience of being the hunted team. And it's just weird that we just keep bringing our game against these good teams and struggling against the lesser teams. It's kind of a one-season version of the roller coaster from 97 to 2007, where just every second year there was no science behind why we'd go from finals to finishing 15th or something, but it just seemed to happen every year, and it's just seeming to happen every year here. So hopefully it carries on to the finals, because we won't have to worry about 15th and 16th place teams in September. But let's just hope that the other part of that equation, the beating the good teams, carries on into September.
Well, even in those years when we were making finals, we never spent 10 weeks on the top of the ladder. I mean, even 1964, we only spent the last 7 weeks of the season on top of the ladder. So you got to go back a long way to sort of replicate that, and that's before our lifetimes. And there is no frame of reference. You're right.
I mean, probably the closest one in recent 21st century is 2004, where we hit the top of the ladder in round 18 and then, of course, didn't win another game for the whole season and lost an elimination final by under a goal. But one of the things that season reminds me of this season, in that there is no Hawthorn 88. There's no Essendon 2000 this season. Like, we're a very good team. You know, your Geelongs, your Brisbanes, Bulldogs, they're all good teams, but you don't fear anyone in the top 8. And look, if I was an opposition supporter, I wouldn't fear Melbourne either. I think they're a very good team, but you don't go into that thinking instantly they're going to beat us no matter what. So I think there's never a better time to be a good side than in a season where there are no other outstanding teams, because you don't want to you don't want to have two great teams and run into the other one in a grand final and lose to them. So I think the version of 2004 where we just fell in a massive heap at the end of that year, I don't see that happening this year. And it's just that season is one. It's an underrated one that haunts me, because I really think that if we'd beaten Essendon in that elimination final, we would have had a pretty good shot at recovering and going on to win that flag. But I think we can keep it going this year, at least into September. We can beat whatever happens this season. I think we'll do it creditably. We won't fall away and just lose the last 5. We're not going to hopefully lose a final by a big margin. I just hope that we can carry it all the way.
Incidentally, that was Essendon's last finals win, I believe.
Yes, very famous, and it almost didn't happen.
So I thought perhaps we played our best full four-quarter effort for the season. The first quarter was pretty frenetic and we led by a goal at quarter time, but it was the second quarter where we started to put our foot down on the throat of the Power and then continued through the second half of the match. And we'll go into more specifics shortly on some individual players later. But Bim, man, you must have been pretty pleased with our ability to defend around the ground and dry up any avenues to Port's goals, as well as our ability to put on our own scoreboard pressure to the contest.
Yeah, absolutely. Just before I jump into that, you've already sold one tonight, Adam. Clint Biscuit, and he's bought a copy. Now Demonstone, there's two. It's going.
Thank you all. I really appreciate that.
We of course get don't we get a bit of a cut of that? I'm sure.
It'll be in some kind of cryptocurrency from our sponsor, CoinSpot.
Yeah, that's called the Hardiman, I think, the cryptocurrency. I thought we won the game, interestingly, in that third quarter because they came out and that was their sort of most energised period of the game. Obviously, they've got the crowd behind them. Obviously, they've been given a rev up. They dominated really probably realistically for the first three quarters of that quarter, maybe half of that quarter. Georgiades took that fantastic mark, missed it, but got a goal not long afterwards. They really that was their best shot at the game. And it was remarkable because in that sort of 15, 16 minutes of domination, they only got a goal and a couple of points. They ended up getting another one. But I thought was just classic Melbourne, holding up their pressure. They gave everything they could. And you just knew once we got that goal, that was it. They'd fired their shot and they weren't going to be able to rally and fire again. And I think, for me, it was, again, a sort of an archetypal D's game this year. And it sounds a bit basic, but I think the issue every club faces when they play a fully wound up MFC team at the moment is moving their ball from defence to their forward line. So, when I say fully wound up, I mean we've got the pressure gauge going, and thanks for that, Andy, putting that on Demonland. We're playing at full intensity. We're running and spreading and making it hard for them to move the ball to transition, from chip it around, and we're trapping it in our forward line. But there's you could see Port, who like to move the ball quickly, they couldn't. And so, the option one is down the line kick, but that, play when they're on their half back line, they're trying to transition it. But that plays into our hands almost literally and metaphorically as well, because we're so well set up ahead of the ball because we've got Lever, May, Petty, and often Max or LJ who sits back in that hole to mark it, or if they don't mark it, bring it to ground. And then we're fantastic at winning that contest when it comes to ground and rebounding, often with a chain of handballs to that free play that we've talked about along the boundary line. But also often just with sort of hack kicks forward. And something I really noticed is how deliberately often Langdon and other players will kick it really high to allow everyone to get back in position. So option two then is to switch to the opposite wing, which Port really just couldn't try, and which also plays into our hand because we're just so good at collectively moving across the ground and moving our sort of web zone across to that side. And then sort of the same thing happens as option one. They look up and then, what do? You go down the line. But the switch can lead to a turnover when we're really pressed up. Cozzy did it. We got that goal where Cozzy got that, I think his first goal that wasn't really crossing, but it was a short chip into space that they missed. But, if it's a long one, teams are really sort of trying to avoid that now, that really long 40, 50 metre cross, because it sits in the air for a long time. And when Melbourne's on, we're right on that contest. And there were a number of them. I think Langdon spoiled. There was a beautiful one by Hunt where he came across and put it over the boundary line. And option three is to try to pick their way up the line with short kicks, which is almost impossible when we're on because there's just no space for the opposition to lead into. And weighted kicks into a hole are really tricky because you've got to get over the top of the players. And then option 4 is trying to pick their way through with lots of handballs, which is what the Dogs try to do to us. And it was interesting watching the Swans Dog game because they both did that. And what was interesting, the Dogs couldn't do it and the Swans could. But they're brilliant at it against most teams, the Dogs, moving the ball with those quick handballs. But against us, their pressure makes it a really high-risk strategy. And at one point, they did get it through with handballs. I don't know if you remember where Motlop should have been caught holding the ball. It went up the other end. It might have even been one of Georgiada's goal, where the commentators were saying, well, that's what they've got to do. Well, it should have broken down on the half-back line because it should have been a free kick, but that was the only time they were able to do that. If it does break, the chain does break, it happens close to our goals on the half-back line and bang, we're away to the races, so they can be really costly, those turnovers. But at least with a kick down the line, you're 50 metres away from 40, 50 metres away from your back half at least. And option 4 is taking on the, being aggressive and taking on the corridor either by hand, foot, or a combination of the two. And that's what the commentators are always saying, try that, go for it. But it's so, it's easier said than done, obviously, as Port realised. They just couldn't get the ball into the corridor because we guard it so well. I reckon we guard the corridor better than any team in the AFL. So if they go for it, the option's there, but that really the execution has to be totally perfect. And if it isn't, the turnover means that it's in the corridor and a score is super likely. And we back ourselves to win that contest because, the mids are pushing up, the wingers are pushing up. We create a outnumber, and it happened a few times. That one where Track got the goal over the top, where when we do win it, our forwards have backed ourselves, our mids and our wingers have backed that we'll win that contest in the middle and stream forward ahead of the ball. So when we do win it, we often create an outnumber in our forward line. You go, well, where are these players coming from? It's because one player's beaten two in the middle and players have pushed forward sort of with confidence. So for me, I think what happens is exactly what happened in this game. Once we get a 3-goal plus lead, we're happy to sit on that and then let the pace go out of the game and let the opposition just hit its sort of collective head against our defensive wall. And if you're not a Demons fan, it must be bloody boring to watch, I reckon, because it's sort of the game pace gets taken out of it. And I think we're pretty happy for that stalemate and just let the opposition sort of keep cycling through those 4 options. That eats up time and the opposition become exhausted. And that's what Port did. As I said, as soon as they'd run out of that shot, fired that shot, really you knew that the game was over, then they weren't going to be able to, do anything else really. So for me, it was just a classic Melbourne game and why we're going to be so hard to beat from anyone really.
The other thing I'd like to add to that, and that was a great analysis, Ben Mann, of why we're so hard to beat. But I was absolutely astounded by how poorly coached Port were in this game. You've outlined all our positives, and it's pretty obvious how we play and the systems that we've got set up in place. But it didn't seem like they'd taken on any vision from previous games where we'd won. They seem to have a single line of attack, which is kick it long to Charlie Dixon and hope that Robbie Gray or Rosie is able to crumb it if Dixon doesn't mark it. But somebody forgot to tell them that Robbie Gray was injured and Rosie wasn't much better either in terms of physical capabilities. I saw certainly in the second half of the game that Dixon moved up the ground chasing kicks, which only left Lever and May and Petty down the back line all on their own to defend, which just absolutely played into our hands. And then to top it all off, he used the best player in his back line, the best intercept player in his back line in Alia, in the ruck and in a tagging role. And that was crazy, wasn't it? It was just absolutely crazy. You've got the game, you've got a chance at that point, but to put Alia into the ruck was just ridiculous. So, the game was all over as soon as he did that. But if you want to see what the Port fans think about their coach, go over to Big Footy for some entertainment.
Yeah, that's that sort of challenge of playing Melbourne is that Port have choices then. And so really the choice is, it's amazing. 3 goals feels like 6 goals against the D's. And the choice is they've got to get going. They've got to move the ball to score. But if they do, we get on top. And so when Hawthorn were in that position, credit to them, they kept going. But that game broke open and we won by 50-odd points. It's the only time because they're the only team who really kept going. Port, so their option is to throw caution to the wind and be aggressive with the ball movement and hope that they're able to do it. But we're so disciplined that that's really difficult to do, or to concede a defeat. And it felt like watching that game that Port conceded that game, which is, really, it must have been so frustrating if you were a Port fan. I just think it's interesting. I mean, there's this cliche, the defences win flags, and you obviously need to score. But I think the sort of ace up our sleeves is that our defensive system helps us score because we press up really high and we're prepared to zone off and intercept, and we really hurt teams on turnovers and win those balls at halfback and transition. But sometimes even when we're super pressing, you get someone like Salem who's marking it on the half-forward flank essentially and then delivering inside 50. So our defence when we're on is obviously stopping them score, but it's really our big driver for our own ability to score. So that's a really dangerous 1-2 for oppositions, and it's based basically on the Tigers. Similar model to what has been successful for the Tigers. That sort of ability to hurt teams off intercepts and win those contests.
Well, let's talk about our defence. Once again, they were superb. Almost any time that Port took the ball out of the middle or rebounded out of our forward line, as you mentioned, our great wall of defence was there to stop any forward play. Petty and Hibbert had 8 intercepts. Petty also affected 7 spoils. Lever, 7 intercepts, 6 spoils. May, 8 intercepts and 6 spoils. I thought Petty was outstanding, and as we've noted in previous shows, his confidence to take the ball on is growing week to week, and this was perhaps his best performance for the D's in just his 21st game, remarkably, and remember that he's also only 21 years old. Super Mikado, this must surely be the best, most consistent defensive unit you've seen at the club in your lifetime.
Yeah, well, it's hard to argue against that just from the results we're seeing. Obviously, there's been a lot of seasons where you could have had the best defenders in the world down there, but they were going to get overwhelmed, and you had great years of Rivers and Frawley. I'm particularly, as a 1998 fanatic, I'm particularly fond of the Seacamp, Ingus and Shanahan combination, but you've also got to remember 2 of those 3 were in the back line of a wooden spoon team the year before. So I think I would have to go this one. And it's not just Lever and May. It's all of them together. Like, I'd written Hibbert off, and he's been really good in his role this year. Salem is just brilliant almost every week. And Petty, he's been great. That Hawthorn game where he came in and he was okay and he went back out for May again, I thought that was a good development game and didn't expect to see him back in the side full-time this year. But obviously what's happened to Adam Tomlinson's given him his opportunity. And he's been fantastic. I wouldn't think that Tomlinson would come back in on current form early next year. I would think I would rather start the season with Petty and go with that as the plan. And it's not just them. It's the midfield defending the kicks out of defence as well. Like, one of the best things about this season is when they go to the camera from behind the goal and you see an opposition player and they've just got no idea what to do with it.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of thing that won't make highlight reels at the end of the year. But I love it when they show that, because it just goes to show that we've got that system set up, and it can be beaten. Look at the Adelaide game. What the hell happened there? But a lot of these teams are just falling straight into that trap. And you're right, Port the other day did exactly the same thing. They just fell straight into that trap. They were just kicking it long just for the sake of it and hoping for the best. And that was when, my version of Melbourne supporter syndrome, when Aaliyah went forward and I thought, oh God, he's going to kick like 6 goals in the last quarter. But there was no point just having someone down there who could take a mark, because they had players who could take a mark, but we were just merrily spoiling and intercepting on them all night because of the way the ball was coming in. So I think statistically at the moment, this would have to be the best back line we've had. And at the moment on the vibe, I'm feeling the vibe, but I would have to wait until the end of the season before I give a final declaration of where they stand in the post-1990 pantheon of Melbourne defences.
Salem appears to be well over his post-injury slump, back to some of his best rebound link-up work, 26 disposals, 8 marks, 85% disposal efficiency, 521 metres gained. So it's good to see. Let's talk about our midfield. The two Bulls in the midfield, they're just continuing their stellar seasons. Petrarca, just elite, 33 possessions, 12 contested, 7 clearances, 6 tackles, 10 score involvements, 6 inside 50s, 788 metres gained. 3 goals were the icing on the cake. Big man, he's really taken that next step to elite levels, hasn't he?
Track.
Yep.
Yeah, he was incredible, wasn't he? And he was so switched on in terms of his approach right from the beginning of the game. And just hearing him speak post-match and impresses, and his thing he does on 360, he's really matured as a young bloke, hasn't he? And it shows on the ground. And he puts his hand up, and I thought his tackle on Pau Pepper was one of those key moments in the game where you knew we were on, and it came not long after Oliver had not quite put a tackle on, but he busted a gut to I forget the Port player was inside the square. He didn't quite get him, but it was just the sort of effort that those defensive efforts are the ones that historically I think we're probably the players would sort of note that they pick and choose which one they go for, but he was just unbelievable. And that snappy kick, where he roved it off the pack, or picked it up off the ground, I should say, and snapped. One, it was at a crucial time of the game, critical to sort of keep that momentum. It was low scoring at that point. But two, it was just so clean for a fella who must be 95 kilos to pick the ball up like that and then shoot. And I love the energy he's bringing towards the crowd. I heard him interviewing saying he loves it when the crowd get into him. And he's a fella, I think, who responds to getting fired up, and that's how he motivates himself. He's terrific fun to watch.
He's also playing like 91% of the game most weeks, so spending a lot of time on the ground. Oliver's stats just as impressive: 31 possessions, 21 contested, 11 clearances, 4 tackles, 6 score involvements, 337 metres gains. He just really needs to work on those set shots. He misses way too many gettable goals. Big man. What odds are you giving Clary a kicking after the siren 20 metres out on a slight angle to win a granny?
I'm not setting a market. One thing I will say in his favour is he was in that set shot. I had no confidence he was going to kick it.
I never did.
None, zero. Like I wouldn't. I just, when they talk about who would you kick for your life,
not him.
Not him. But he was absolutely stuffed. Like he could barely catch his breath on that. So he's got a poor technique, and it's only going to be exacerbated. I reckon he probably should do what McKay does for Carlton and just start doing bananas from 40 metres out and kicking around the body or something, because like you said last week, it's pretty hard to change a technique. Maybe set shots, maybe a little bit, but yeah, he's a woeful shot for goal. Yeah,
I reckon set shots is probably easier to change a technique than when you're running full pelt.
And that was a bummer too, that one, because it was a brilliant connecting play before it, and it ended up with maybe T-Mac took a mark, but it ended up with Max Gawn, who weighted it beautifully into that spot. And there were 2 players there who could have marked it when it was down there. And I think Jordan was the other one. I said, hey, Jordan, hope you mark it. So, but yeah, I did. I was as soon as he marked it, I thought, oh, it's good. Well, it's another point will help.
B-Man, do you want to you wanted to talk about clearances? Maybe take that now.
Yeah, just Andy, I've heard just before we came on, actually, they're looking at changing a couple of the results. The Dogs smashed them, the Swans, in clearances from the centre, and so the AFL have decided they've had to give them the points because they absolutely killed him in that match. And
I watched that game, and I think I'm coming around to what you say. It's those possessions after the clearances that matter, and I think that's what got the Bulldogs.
Yeah, so in this game, it was 36-33. They won the centre clearances 11-9. But Viney, he was very magnanimous afterwards, Goodwin. He was asked about the Viney-Wines matchup, and he said, both coaches would come away happy. And bollocks, totally bollocks, because he is absolutely key to their game. And he had 1 clearance at halftime. 5 in the end, but the heat of the game had gone out in the last quarter. So, I don't know how many he got. So he had 4 in the second half. I don't know how many of those 4 were in the last quarter. But it was like stopping, I think even they mentioned it on the call, but it was the equivalent of importance of stopping Liberatore. So, they would have banked a lot of their game plans around him winning the centre clearances, and Boak didn't really have much. So I thought Viney did a terrific job. They won 11-9, but those 11, so many of them were scratchy. You could see we just bounced off the half-back flank. They just fed, Petty, that mark he took, the spoil. So many of those clearances were hopeless. They got very few clearing. I don't know what the score it was from clearances. So even though they won by 2, we won around the stoppage clearances by 5. Again, we don't need to be smashing teams in clearances. As you say, it's all about what happens afterwards. And for them, nothing happened after any of their clearances. They just had a mare when it came to clearances. And they're a team that rely on that, getting out the front of that contest and getting good. Because someone like Dixon, he is ineffectual if he's got players coming across him. And so that's what happens when they dump kick. But if you can get clear out the front and put it to his advantage, very few, he's like Hawkins, very few defenders, doesn't matter which defender you are, is going to beat him one-on-one if the ball's kicked to his advantage and there's not someone coming across. And they're, like George was saying, their whole game plan structured around that model of kicking it into him. He has to be the pea in the pod for it to work. And if they're not getting clean clearances, well, he's barely getting any decent looks at it. And he was pretty much had no influence. His goal that he got, did he get 2 or the one from a hopeless free kick? And
two of them after the sirens.
Yeah, half-time and full-time. Despite Viney only having 18 to Wine's 33, Viney's racked up a game-high 10 tackles and 33 pressure acts.
Yeah, exactly.
Super Mikado, how have you seen Viney's return from injury?
Well, I think it was definitely a role-player game because offensively he had one effective kick. So if you just looked at that, if you're the kind of person who just goes and looks at the stats and buries people on that alone, you would have thought he had a terrible game. And I'm not saying he had a great game, especially offensively, but I do agree that the defensive job he did was really important and stopping Wines. And it just goes to what they say about Brayshaw. You've got to do other stuff. You can't do everything you want to do. You have to do other stuff to play for the team. And I think Viney really did that the other day. And it's funny because sometimes Harms does that. Like Harms did that against Liberatore against the Bulldogs. And now Viney's doing it. And I don't know whether are we going to play both of them? Are we going to keep both of them in the side? Or are we kind of just going to go for one at a time? So it'll be interesting to see over the next couple of weeks who they use to keep people accountable, the top midfielders from other teams. But I sort of just, maybe it's the syndrome again, but you just Viney. Every time I'm thinking, when's he going to get injured again? It's like, just get it over with now so that you're ready to come back for the finals because he's just had such a bad run recently. But I think will be, as they say, better for the run over the last few weeks.
George?
Yeah, just talking about taking one for the team or doing it for the team. There was some really great vision on the AFL site, the round so far with I can't remember the two people on it just at the moment, where they showed Max Gawn when the ball was in the Melbourne forward line, he actually ran the length of the ground to man up on Charlie Dixon, who'd moved up to around about the midway mark. And what that enabled Stephen May to do was then be free. So in the event that the ball came out, Dixon was covered by Gawn and May was sitting there all on his own. But again, it was just a beautiful example of, like the Viney situation or the Brayshaw situation, playing your team role to the advantage of everybody rather than just an individual.
Yeah, and Gawn's doing it at both ends. There was the McDonald goal where he kicked it from open play and Max was in the middle, and then the next thing he was shepherding for McDonald to kick the goal 20 metres out. So, the work rate for a bloke who's that big is just remarkable.
Absolutely. Let's go into the forward line and what a difference Ben Brown makes. If you look at his stats, you wouldn't think that there was much to write home about. but when looking at the game in context, you realise that it forced Port to mix and match Jonas and Aliir on him, eventually forcing Hinkley to inexplicably, as someone mentioned before, to play Aliir all over the ground and in the ruck, running him ragged and tiring him out for the stints that he went down back, eventually forcing him out of position up forward. But back to Brown, having him in the team, force the best defenders on him. It frees up T-Mac, it frees up Fritsch for their 3 and 1 goals, as well as T-Mac's 10 and Fritsch's 6 score involvements. In addition, Brown's disposal, I thought, was really good into the forward line. George, after weeks of us screaming for a Ben Brown up forward, we finally got our wish.
Yeah, hopefully the coaches noted the Demonland podcast. We've been calling this for weeks and weeks, and it's finally happened. But the dramatic change around in the way the forward line functioned was evidence of why you need Brown in there. There was an interesting parallel in the Dogs Sydney game as well, where Aaron Norton was injured last week, and so the Dogs forward line was left with Josh Bruce. Bruce, who's kicked 40 goals for the season, managed a single goal for the whole game, simply because it enabled the opposition to double team, to release the spare man, and all the things that we've been watching in our forward line to date. As soon as you put Ben Brown in there, things completely changed. As Andy just said, releases T-Mac. Fritsch is taking the third best defender instead of the second. The important thing I find with Brown is he's a genuine full forward, so he knows how to run the patterns. He knows how to create space. And if you have a look at a number of the goals that were kicked by the team, the first one he actually that Jackson kicked when Jackson went across the front of the pack and was had an uncontested mark. It was simply because Brown had 3 defenders on him. They all knew who the danger was that in Brown, but he'd engaged the other 3, and Jackson just slid across to take the mark unopposed. Likewise, that brilliant goal that Petrarca kicked at when he ran into the open goal. I'd invite you to have a look at who's in the background on the wing. There was a chain of handballs that came up. Jackson kicked it to McDonald. The next kick, if it hadn't got over the top to Petrarca, could have gone to Brown further out on the 50-metre line. He was running a hook lead at that particular time. Importantly, he'd taken the defender out there, and that's why Petrarca had all the space between him and the goal. The defender was out trying to chase Brown down. This is just a typical full forward running his craft, and it was what he did with the other players around him that made such a dramatic difference. Even when Pickett kicked that goal after he crumbed beautifully off the back of the pack, it was because Brown was attempting the mark at the front of the pack, and I think he was pushed under it by the defender. But all it meant was the ball went out the back, and Pickett was benefiting from it. So. Yeah, great inclusion into the side, made a huge difference to the way people were playing. He works well with T-Mac in terms of running the changeovers between the two of them. You don't see the two of them sitting in the same piece of space at the same time. He'll be a great addition. And this week against Hawthorn, who've got an absolutely decimated back line, we might see the multiple goals that we've been expecting him to kick since he's come to our club.
Big man.
Yeah, the very first goal we got was that Jackson goal, wasn't it? That was the first goal of the game. And you saw right then the benefit of having that second tall, because it was actually shocking to defence by then, because they, as you say, 3 went to Brown and allowed, not only allowed Jackson to mark it, but he had a free run at it. You've got to put a body on him and block him from that contest, but there was no one to do so. I think I said that they bring him in for the Port game, and for me it was all about getting him fit and getting him ready. And if you look at him now, he looks so much more athletic and fit than he, and his sort of physique looks different than he did at the beginning of the season. And if we're joking in the Giants game is that Tommy Mack needed to look up and kick to Tommy Mack. Well, he was kicking to a 6'5" version of Tommy Mack now, and I think really pleasingly for the club is. He didn't kick any goals, but I don't think they'd be worried at all because two things. His mobility was terrific, and there was a play where he turned a player inside out and he weighted a ball, as you say, Andy. He's a beautiful field kick, good technique, and he weighted a ball into the corridor, and I think actually Alir got back to spoil it, I'm pretty sure. But it was a beautiful kick to position, but what was most impressive was he turned... he dropped the mark. It was on the boundary line, and he beat his opponent to the ball and recovered and turned inside to the corridor to kick it across his body. Earlier, he had one where he snapped and almost went through. It was right on line, but it got touched on the line. But that came after he'd dropped the mark and he recovered. He could have easily clunked another couple of marks. He got up the ground. And talk about Dixon is that Dixon's like an old school footballer, old school full forward who's strong and big, and he wants to win his one-on-one contests, but he gets forced up the ground and he's too slow to turn around. So they clearly it's interesting to say Super Mercado about Norm Smith not liking forwards. I think Melbourne are similar in the sense they want their forwards running up and down the ground. They want mobile forwards who can lead up, take the pressure off, mark on the long lead up the wing, which he got quite a few up there on the wing, turn around and run hard back. And as you say, George, he's obviously a forward, so he runs to the right spots and he just creates such a matchup problem. And again, we talked about it when he first played. Cozzy kicks 3 goals. T-Mac, he kicked 3 goals as well, didn't he?
Yep.
3 goals. So, the question is, would have they got their goals without him in it? And so you look at the total goals, not who kicked them. For me, they've wanted him fit. There's been the key thing, and he looks fit, and I suspect he'll play for the rest of the season now.
Adam?
Well, one of the things I think the Sydney game, if you go back and look at that, where he kicked 3 goals, him and McDonald were working beautifully as a team. There was one goal that each of them got where the other one did the block for him to take it. And that's why I was so retrospectively annoyed when we dropped him after the Carlton game. At the time, I was happy to see what Wiedemann could do, and this is not anti-Wiedemann by any stretch of the imagination, but I just think that he got into it against North after a long layoff. He was really good in his second game. Had a bad game against Carlton, not even a bad game, just an ineffectual game in a forward line that suddenly had Wiedemann dropped into it and as a replacement for Jackson, which probably wasn't necessary in the end. There was just that clamour to get him in. And I don't think we should have dropped him in the first place. And you look at last week, and it's exactly 100% what you just said then about McDonald. He was playing a really good game up the ground, and he's looking into Fritsch, who's got 4 people hanging off him. I look at football from a very amateur perspective, but it just seemed insane to me that we didn't have that other forward down there. No matter who it was, anyone who could create a contest and bring the ball to ground if they didn't mark it, because, as you said, it brought the Crummers back into it. It's no coincidence that it was Pickett's best game for weeks, because every kick wasn't being put straight down the throat of a defender. Even if it wasn't to our advantage, we were often bringing it to ground. So I can't see any reason why we wouldn't play with either Brown, Wiedemann, or any other person who can get down there and take a mark or create a contest for the rest of the season.
I think Brown was screwed out of a couple marks as well that I thought he had great purchase on. Also held my breath when he got cleaned up. I thought maybe that was the end of him for that night.
Even I had a bit of MFCSS. Jeez, and did I say I can't remember? But he also had 3 tackles, which was that's what they want Wiedemann to do. That's what they want Brown to do. And I was really pleased that Wiedemann, I think, had 3 tackles in the VFL as well. They need him. I think we had 19 inside 50 tackles. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah, 19 to 9.
Sorry?
19-9.
19, that's right, 19-9. That's a big difference, isn't it? And so really they would have been drilling into him. You come back into the side, you've got to be fit, you've got to be mobile, you've got to be doing these pressure acts. You just can't have it. We talked about it weeks ago. And I reckon when this season's done and dusted, no matter what happens, they'll look back at that period when we didn't have the big tall win, because you've got to keep your powder dry, and it's a long season. So I think they've played it smart. And as I say, he looks really in good nick.
I don't think they will actually bring Wiedemann back in as a full forward. They're obviously playing him as a more mobile person up the ground at Casey.
Exactly, like Tommy Mack, that's the role.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, Casey are playing Mitch White as the full forward. Yeah. So I think they're trying to develop something else out of Wiedemann, which we'll have to wait and see whether that works. But I think we can forget about him as a more permanent type full forward.
Yeah, and I reckon, to be honest, it suits him because, a couple of years ago, I think it was 2019 maybe, he rucked a bit at Casey, and I reckon he's got some chops as a ruckman. And the thing for him is that, maybe it's oversold a bit, but he just strikes me as the classic confidence player. And for that sort of play, you need him up around the ball to get some footy because he's good on the lead, but, as we talked about it, he struggles one-on-one. I think that will come. And so, 3-4 years, he might be as strong as Hawkins now. He can keep building on it. But in the meantime, I think that's exactly the role. And I really like the way the Casey team mirrors the structures and systems of the senior team. And, yeah, that's exactly right, George. I think he's playing the T-Mac role, the lead up. He got a lot of his possessions up around the wing and spent a bit of time in the ruck as well.
I think those few weeks where he went bananas at the end of 2018, even when he came back in the side, I remember every week was a new possession record for him. It was a new career best possessions, and he was up to that Geelong final. Not only did he kick 3 goals or 4, however many it was, he also had 23 possessions or 24 possessions. So, contrast that to this year when he's been playing and he's not doing that. He's more forward. So I agree with you guys. I think it's a really good option. Now his only problem is that McDonald is playing out of his skin as well, so he might not get in front of him, but it's always handy to have the backup there of somebody who can do that role.
And speaking of Tommy McDonald, he's marking, like when he moves, he's not great one-on-one. It's when he's moving, but he's in such great form and his confidence is so up. He took a great mark deep in defence. It was almost on the sort of almost on the 50-metre arc, where he just seemed to sort of come at the packet pace, and he just snatched it out of the air. He's got super sticky hands. And there was one point where we drove it deep into the pocket, much to the angst of many D's fans who want us to centre the ball and not kick it to the pocket. But LJ was, Luke Jackson was going for the mark in that contest. Brown was going for the mark in that contest. Tommy McDonald was going for the mark. And I'd say gone, but that would be a lie. But those three players, that represents a fair bit of height, all going for it. That ball was the one, I think you're thinking about, Andy, where I would have just about paid it. Of course, being the umpire, I would have paid it. But it looked like Brown had stuck it. And I think it was from the Spargo kick that had come in. But, he's... I think that's really, come finals, I think I heard Gawn say it, come finals, having that height makes it very hard. You've got to, exactly as you said, George, you've got no choice but to put a tall defender on them. You can't not put a tall defender on Ben Brown, can you?
No. It was also a nice welcome back to Cozzy, as mentioned. And yes, I might have said last week that he might have needed a rest and that his recent form may have not warranted his selection. And yes, I'm more than prepared to eat some humble pie. Cozzy was back to his electric best with 3 goals and 2 monster long-range goals to boot. Super Mikado, I don't think you've been on this podcast in the Cozzy era. Are you enjoying the Cozzy show? Perhaps you can also give your thoughts on the other 2 recruits of recent times, Jackson and Rivers.
Yeah, well, it's hard not to enjoy the Cozzy show, even though he's had a couple of down weeks. I think the Giants game was probably the worst, even though he got a goal. But the weeks before that, he was at least still chasing and trying to do his best. But I really do think that having that extra tool there brought him back into it. And I'm really glad he got to go to his home state against the team his uncle played for. and have a real primetime performance there. The thing I love, the first goal he kicked, the Port bloke was almost on top of him, and he put it up in the air like a intercontinental missile. Like I still can't work out for the life of me how the ball went so high but also went so far. That was a remarkable finish there. So that just goes to show that it's not all snaps from the pocket and turning people inside out. He's got that. He's got the boot to kick him from distance as well. So I think if we keep him out of the clutches of other teams, I think he's an integral part for years to come, and that's Jackson as well. Obviously, Freo's probably out of the running for ruckman now that they've just re-signed one for big money. But, gee, if I was West Coast, I'd have the dump truck full of money just sitting at the border and waiting for it to reopen. Have a pop at Jackson because he looks so good. Obviously, he's a completely different player to Gawn. It's almost more Jeff White-ish than Gawn-ish. But just the movement and his disposals, that Richmond game where it was drizzling rain and I think he had 18 disposals at 100%. Like that's almost unprecedented for us. So I think those two certainly you can lock them away as just brilliant draft selections. As we all know at Melbourne, anything can happen. You can get sucked in early on a draft pick and end up disappointed. But I think these two will give us a lot of enjoyment for years to come. And yeah, Rivers has been really enjoyable as well. He's been a bit quieter the last few weeks, but again, I think it's just playing a role. Does most things right, plays his role, and I can't see any reason why you'd pick anyone else over him at the moment. And it's obviously also good to keep Rivers and Jackson together because they came from the same club. So hopefully one doesn't sort of go back home and send a letter for the other one to come join him. So I think it looks like one of the better drafts we've had in many years.
And whilst you're giving us your views on your recruits, Bin Man has professed his love of James Jordan, who effectively is a new recruit for us this year. We have appeared to uncovered another gem here. What are your thoughts on JJ?
He just racks up possessions, and that's the thing. And at the start of the year, it was racking up possessions, but he was quite a bit untidy with them. The last few weeks, I've certainly think he's tightened up on that a lot. But he is just one of those players who seems to be in the right place at the right time, and came from nowhere. Like you wouldn't have thought at the end of last year that he would come in round one and play the entire season to date. But I think he's been great, and again, he's just playing a role. There's been a couple of really good games that he played, but even last week he was just good. He was just good player, solid player, got ball, does defensive stuff, and the exact kind of player you need to, God forbid, win flags. Let's say the kind of player you need for finals. You need those players who aren't going to be, he's not going to win a Brownlow, but you would hope he finishes reasonably high in the Rising Star Award because they recognise that just ability to be there and to get the ball, and most of the time to do something well with it. So he's been a really good find this year too.
I disagree. I reckon he's a good chance of winning a Brownlow in all seriousness because he's exactly the sort of player that that wins Brownlows, that racks up possessions. He'll once he goes full time in the midfield, as I was saying last week, one of the great things about Viney coming back in is it frees him up to go back play basically a winger half back role, which is what he did on the weekend. Once he's full time mid, he's 21. He'll be full time mid probably in the next couple of seasons. He'll be getting 25, 30 possessions a game, and he's such a smart ball user, and he kicks goals and he tackles. So I reckon he's the sort of player that wins Brownlows just because he'll get the numbers that you need to get that award.
Well, I hope I'm wrong. I'll offer for him to come and thrash me around the head if he wins it. But yeah, really enjoyable watching him play, and that's the thing this year. I'm always scared that this sort of trying to win it off the back of defence is going to collapse at the wrong moment. But there has been a lot of really enjoyable stuff to watch this year that's not the kind of stuff that's going to be in highlight reels. And it's that stuff, the footage from behind the goals of teams not being able to find anyone to kick to. It's the Jordans, it's Spargo and some of the really smart stuff he does. It's just not the kind of stuff that you'd put on, your modern equivalent of Hotter Than Hell 98 season highlights. but it has been really enjoyable to watch. And yeah, Jordan definitely is one of those players, and Jackson as well.
Yeah, he makes such smart decisions. In the chat room, DL Fart and What Are We Seeing noted that Cozzie's Max told a beautiful story in one of his post-games presses about Cozzy. And he's not been able to get home, apparently. It's the first time he's been able to spend any time back in SA since his mum's died. And just the sort of care that Max talked about it, I think that's one of the sort of hidden ingredients of the success of this season, how much care there is from players to each other. And that, for Cozzy to come home, as you say, in front of his uncle Byron, but also not having been able to get back there and then perform. And Max said in that post-match interview that he expects that Cozzy will be able to stay then for a little while. So presumably he might have stayed there for a few days, 4 or 5 days, I don't know how long. But, it's easy to forget sometimes what these players are doing. And it's, he had an awful start to his year, and such credit to him to, he hasn't missed a game, has he? And, of course he had a sort of down period, but that puts it in perspective, those weeks where he's, in the middle of winter in Melbourne and his family's back in South Australia still trying to sort of cope with his mum's death.
Yeah, and he's so young as well. Like, it's not like Aaron Davey, who was probably 2 or 3, 4 years older when he started his career. This is a kid, really, and he's had all that tragedy and everything, and that's why I was really glad that they left him in this week. Like, again, I don't think if you're going to play horses for courses, I don't know who would have replaced him anyway, but it was good to just, leave him in, see what happened with the new forward structure or the old forward structure, and just see if that helped him out. And hopefully, look, you never know, things can go from one week to another, but I think that he would have got a lot of confidence from that back. And to be kicking goals from 50 metres out, it just shows that he's got more tricks in his bag than the snaps around the corner from 20 metres out in a phone booth sized area. He's got a lot of tricks, and that should make opposition defences pretty scared.
And in addition to those tricks, he's also another super smart player, and we've talked about that a few times this year, is Taylor has selected smart footballers with high footy IQ, and he does lots of small things where he taps the ball forward, or he doesn't take possession and instead tries to sort of jam it with his foot, or he does a lot of clever stuff. He's great to watch, just to sort of zero in on him. And he also does a lot of, when he's really hyped up, does some great defensive work. There was one where he, I forget the Port player, but was deep in the pocket, defensive pocket, and he went to a clearing kick, and Cozzy had the wherewithal to jump up high and make the player have to kick over the top of him, which caused the ball to be really high up and I think Langdon spoiled over the boundary line. So, he didn't touch the ball, probably wouldn't even get a 1%er for that, I'm not sure. But it was the reason Langdon could spoil it over the boundary line was that effort just to jump high in the air. And, he seems to be always thinking. And, he's going to have one of those games where it all clicks and he goes bananas. So I just hope it's at the G and I'm there at the top of the Ponsford.
In September.
Good luck getting to the top of the Ponsford at the moment.
The other player that I'll get your thoughts on, Adam, because we haven't spoken to you in the last 2 years since he's come to the club, Ed Langdon. What are your thoughts in general on him? This week I thought his disposal wasn't so great. He could have kicked a couple of goals. He kicked a couple on the full, but just in general with Langdon, how do you think he's settled into the team? Because probably the recruit of the year. Not this year, last year as well. The commentators, I think, said this week that he's the recruit of this year. Got that one a bit wrong.
Yeah, well, look, I think it's great to have that kind of player that you can put the ball in the hands of going down the wing and to gather that ground. And you're right, the disposal this week was very iffy. It was sort of like when he first started at the start of last year. It was the same thing. He was getting a lot of the ball, but his kicking was a bit, dubious. But in the meantime, he's been really good. And, just really good inclusion. We paid pretty much nothing for him. So pretty hard to argue that that's been anything but an unqualified success. And still reasonably young bloke as well. So, again, it's like a lever. Someone where you've got probably 7-8 years left in their career maybe, So, what amazing business to get someone in like that and know that you've got them there for years to come.
But before I go to you, Big Man, about that, we just haven't had a wingman like that for a long time. So it's good to finally get one in. Big Man, you wanted to add something?
Oh, I just had a question actually for Super Mercado and you and George too. If I asked a few weeks ago now, maybe 5 or 6 weeks ago, has there been a better recruit from another club at the Melbourne Footy Club in, let's say, since 1970? And if so, who?
Well, Super Mercado is probably the one he's got all the facts and figures.
Gee, it's off the top of my head. It's quite a difficult one. I'm almost plumping for Stephen May at the moment, but
that's a fair call.
Yeah, but
and Lever, mate. Yeah, apart from the Roma, what are the
apart from right now? Look, I'd have to think about it, but yeah, pretty good. It's pretty good, and we've done really well recently. And this is the thing: when we went from being rock bottom terrible, where no one would come to us, and we got Bernie Vince probably. Just because, we probably, bunged him a few bucks that he wouldn't have got from Adelaide if he'd stayed there. After that, you've got Hibbard's been good, Melksham's been good, Langdon's been good, May's been good, Lever's been good. Tomlinson he had a bit of a rocky start when that first role didn't work what they wanted to, but he really had a spot set. So that's what happens, I guess, when you become at least a half-decent team. You can attract these players to come to you.
And I've heard a lot of players, actually, several players talk about the importance of Lewis and his time at the club.
Yep.
So, in terms of the culture that he brought, he's shocked when he got there at the lack of, I guess the sort of discipline, things like tidying up the change rooms and those sorts of things. I've heard, I think it might have even been Track talking about, that sort of mentoring and copying that behaviour from him.
Yeah, absolutely.
I
will peruse my archives and come up with a determination on our player purchases from other clubs.
I'm hoping
maybe a best 22 from other clubs.
I'm hoping Tom Gillies features in there somewhere.
Poor old Tom. That's some of the worst. I think he must have some kind of record, like 2 games, and they were a total of about 220-point losses.
Nice. Well, let's move on to previewing the next game. Changes this week. George, are we going to wield the axe this week? Most likely not. Could there be any changes?
Most likely not. Mainly because I don't think that anyone at Casey is really pressing their case. Wiedemann's obviously going to spend a bit more time down there. Vandenberg, the previous week at Casey, certainly was pressing his case, but he certainly wasn't as impressive against Werribee as previously. So I don't think that we'll see any changes. There are a couple of opportunities, though. I don't know that Harms and A and B are the ones that really concern me. Mainly as we head into finals, simply because in finals the difference between winning and losing often comes down to 1 or 2 individual acts or non-acts or inabilities, and certainly in this game both of those players got exposed again for their inability to make the smart decision or even pick the ball up off the ground or deliver the ball cleanly to someone else. So there's an opportunity for people like, I'd imagine, Bedford to slot in there, Vandenberg to slot in there, but not just at the moment.
Big Man?
Nibbler's not going out of that side, George. It's like, well, he's just not. No one can do his running. No one can do his case. There's not a single player outside, even in that 22. Probably Langdon's the only one who can cover as much territory. So that fumble you talk about was deep in the defensive. He's a forward that was like 20 metres out from the Port goal. His kilometres are phenomenal. And I just think there's no one in the case who can get close to the sort of kilometres he can do. The only change he's not coming out. There's no I don't know what I'll do if
I recognise that. I recognise that, but at some stage, people are going to realise he doesn't tackle. He doesn't get the ball. He puts pressure on, but it'll get to the point for him where a Bedford will put as much more pressure on.
Bedford will blow up if he does half the kilometres. There's no one who can do. He's doing like 21, 22 kilometres a game, Nibbler. No one's doing that.
Yeah.
It's just like it's all about what he's doing without the ball.
So do we bring Rosman in because he can outrun him?
But he can't.
He can.
He's quick. He's quick over the ground, but no one's doing the running and the pressure that
he's already beaten him in the 3Ks.
Yeah, but
Rosman got injured this week, so he's not coming in.
No, exactly.
So leaving the Nibbler thing, I think the only he doesn't like making changes, Goody, and I really respect that philosophy. So he's been pretty keen on that. The one I would reckon, I thought Harms had another average game, and some of the things we talked about last week happened again. He makes some curious decisions, and he seems to sort of think he's dusty half the time, and I just like him better when he's got a job to do and he takes an opposition mid. Viney was the perfect player to take Wines, and these 10 tackles was sort of evidence of why. So that sort of left Harms without a job, and I just feel like he gets a little bit, like you said a couple of weeks ago, George, maybe it was last week, but he gets a little bit lost in the role when he speaking of not clean, a couple of times he fumbled. I thought to be fair, he had a better second half. I reckon that they'll ultimately want Melksham back in that side because I watched the VFL game. Was that your review of it on Demonland, Andy?
No, not mine.
Okay, so it was a good. It was a good game to watch. We certainly got on our bike in the second half, and a couple of he was quite involved and played as a mid most of the time, Melksham, and I just think that he'll bide his time, and at some point he'll come in and. It won't be this week, I think, though, but come finals, they'll be pretty keen to get someone of his ability, particularly his kicking ability, to come back into the side.
Does Sparrow have a role coming back?
Yeah, I reckon. I mean, he could, for me, I'd bring him in front of, I'd have him in front of Harms because I reckon Viney can do the defensive job. Maybe if there's a runner, like a opposition, horses for courses. If you had the right matchup for Harms, then, but I'd rather Captain Jack in there. I think he's a smart player who takes his chances. I reckon Jones was a shocking time for him to get that injury because on that form that he showed in his last game that he played, I'd have him ahead of Harms and Sparrow.
Super Mercado, anything you want to add in terms of changes?
I just had Sparrow for Harms, but at the same time, I'm also happy just to go with the same lineup this week. I don't think there's any question of needing to rest anyone or anything like that, especially with the break they'll have had before this game. So I'm happy to see how it goes this week. And if people can't deliver against Hawthorn, then we might need to look at what we do before we play Gold Coast. But, I'd be quite happy to stick with the same side or go with Sparrow.
Big man, previewing this game, how do you see the Hawks? Clarkson being the, as good as he's very good at out-coaching teams. You'd think he would have done his research on D's and how to beat them. He would have looked at all the teams that have beaten us, and I'm sure he's going to attempt to do that rather than try to play their own natural game to win. I think they're going to try to stop us and work out ways to stop us. Do you see the same thing happening?
Well, I'm pleased they didn't make that announcement about him getting the axe or whatever you call it, because that would have been 2 for 2, wouldn't it? I mean, it's interesting that Lepage, who is now on Channel 7, I quite like, but, I made a similar point to him that he brought up in the commentary, is that I reckon it's a bit of a myth, this idea of teams working us out, because, I guess we talked about it last week, but if they're working us out, they unpick the defence and they score big against us. But no team has. It's only been the one team that's got over 100 against us. So, working us out will be keeping us to under 65 points. That's the way that teams are going to beat us, is to keep us under 65 points, not to score heavily against us, if that makes sense. And it's easy to engineer higher scores, for example, by taking more risks than it is engineer stopping the opposition scoring, and then also scoring enough yourself to win. And that's the problem for Clarkson. So what do? I suspect what will depend, he's a curious cat. He might attack, and that's what I hope he does, because it'll make for a better game. But he's just as likely to try to hold the ball as long as possible and suck the life out of it, in which case it's up to us. If we can, you have to – that's the problem with our game plan, is that to play at that intensity is tough. If they chip it around like Collingwood did, well, we have to press right up on them and force the turnover, or allow them to chip it around. If we allow to chip it around, they'll stay within 2 or 3 goals, or we won't get that distance. It'll be a dead boring game. So, I hope his other alternative is to do what I said before in those options. His option 3, or whichever of the options I mentioned, was to attack down the corridor, and that's what I hope they do. But they were woeful on the weekend. So it depends a little bit. Those sorts of middling teams, or I guess they're bottom, if they turn up and they're all switched on and we're not, then, anything can happen. We know that. But, I think that hopefully they'll attack. And if they attack, we might jump out to a big lead and sort of keep it. But, he hasn't got really sure, he can be his sort of tactical genius, but he hasn't got the players. If you haven't got the players, you can be, as genius as much as you want, but you're not going to sort of beat our system.
George?
Yeah, just a couple of things. Our posters in the chat room have noted that North have just beaten the Eagles by 10 points.
I have a feeling probably Big Man didn't want to know that. Am I right?
There goes my as live experience.
I didn't want to mention that because I know Big Man is. So thanks for spoiling for
Sorry, I wasn't aware of that slight problem. But just talking about the Hawthorn game, though, a couple of years ago, Clarkson said you lose a soldier, you bring another soldier in, and I think that's his biggest problem at the moment. He actually hasn't got any soldiers, and the soldiers that he have got aren't very good.
And Jaff's out this week as well, most likely.
It's not only Jaff, who was basically almost their centre half back.
Their interceptor, yeah.
Yes, Scrimshaw's out with concussion, so he'll be mandatory out this week. There's another backman, and Hardwick did a hamstring before the game this week. So that's 3 backmen have disappeared out of the side from what they had last week. There's no Wingard, no Day, no Gunston. No Impey, and certainly no Sicily in the back line, so there's a big opportunity for us to completely steamroll the side. Hawthorn will try, no doubt, the old rope-a-dope type of game plan, which is basically all they've got going for them at the moment. Our defenders are far too good for Kaczynski and O'Brien. They just won't allow them the opportunity. So, yeah, quite confident about this week, and I think we might see with Ben Brown in there, I think we might see some rather large scores being caused.
Well, we certainly need it. That's been my big bugbear this year, is that we haven't really put teams to the sword. So I'd like to see that. I'd love to have a bit of safety in percentage, because I have a feeling there will be equal with some teams in that top 4. So I'd like to I'd like to stay comfortably above certainly any of the interstate teams. But yeah, we've got an opportunity the next 2 weeks to bank some percentage, obviously.
Except Andy, I'm just looking at the forecast. It's minimum 6, 13 max, 2 to 4 mils rain, windy, 90% chance of rain, cloudy, very high chance of showers with possible small hail. Winds northwesterly 25 to 35 k, but luckily they turn westerly but go up to 30 to 45 k.
Can't wait to sit outside with the whole top level of the MCG closed.
Maybe that will straighten up our kicking if we utilise the wind.
No more pockets.
And just to go, just for the Bradbury plan, if there is one this week, if you have a look at all the other games coming up this round, we've got Freo playing Geelong in Western Australia. Richmond versus the Lions at the MCG. Well, you can't back anything on Richmond at the moment. GWS are playing the Swans in Ballarat. The Suns, who are in great form at the moment, are playing the Bulldogs, so in Gold Coast. So that'll be an interesting one. And the Saints, also in good form, are taking on Port at Marvel. So if the Bradbury plan works, we'll be 2 games clear on the top of the ladder this week.
And this is where you don't want to be caught between a top 4 plan and a top 8 plan, because you want St Kilda to win, you want GWS to win, you want Freo to win.
That's right.
And
there's other times where you can't tell, what do I want them to? Do I want this? Which way do I want it? Now we're locked into at least a top 4 plan. It makes it a lot easier.
Richmond will probably bounce back this week as well. So that could be good too. But you know what? This is typical Melbourne, and this is where my MFC SS comes in, because I reckon everything will be set up for us. All those results will come off, and then what will we do?
COVID.
Well, I haven't even factored COVID into it yet. Don't get me started.
Speaking of Richmond, I think that, that's interesting because they've just dropped off a cliff, haven't they? And one of the things is the game plan, like I've said, a few times, obviously, they're not exactly the same, but rely on the same foundations of contest and winning ahead of the clearances and turning it over at the halfback flank. And, it's interesting to see a team when the energy sapped out of them, how quickly they fall back to a middle of the table team. So that's the warning for us, that it's a very challenging game plan to keep going over a period of time. So if we can get 3-4 grand finals from this period, I'll be pretty happy. And then we can sort of come back to the pack a bit, and we can maybe trade Jackson out.
Well, the the Facebook page, Useless AFL Stats, because Richmond have lost 4 in a row now, and they listed all the last time, or how many days it's been since other teams have lost 4 in a row, and we're 688 days away from our last 4 in a row losses, whereas Richmond are 1 day away.
And Geelong was 5,500 away.
Yeah, that's correct. So there you go. Anything else, boys?
Just the only other thing I thought was, did you guys watch the VFL game?
I didn't. Haven't had the chance, George or
yeah, I watched the whole game. It was a really interesting game because Werribee are a seriously good side. And they've got a group of players who are high level. I mean, we've picked up De Claes from Werribee, and he's slotted in beautifully. He's just a high quality player, but he's not the only one that remaining at that Werribee side. But so we're very glad to have him. But it's interesting, as Binman said before, the matching of the Melbourne game plan to the Casey game plan, and the players playing the various roles almost exclusively. For example, they use in the ruck. Door, yeah, sorry. Yeah, Door in the ruck exclusively, with Wiedemann coming in occasionally.
Yeah.
Sparrow playing the roles that we want him to play in the middle. There was, I think,
White playing the Ben Brown full forward role.
Yeah. All these roles, and even in the back line, the same sort of thing. Bowie's playing something that's probably that sweeping role. Down back, Joel Smith was the lever version this week. So in the event that injuries occur, certainly in the senior side, we've got players who are ready to go. They may not be as good as the ones in the senior side, obviously, but the fact is they're playing the role. They're getting used to that what's required of them when they're playing that role, should they ever be needed to be called up to the seniors. So it was really interesting, and it was the same sort of thing. It was just a matter of time before they ground them down into the ground and won the game. But Werribee are a seriously good side, and
blink of the eye, they got 4 or 5 goals in a row, didn't they? And it was it's on KO So you can watch it on KO. It's well worth having a look at. It's Libby Birch, isn't it, George?
Yeah, it is Libby Birch, yeah.
She was the commentator, and it was great just having someone calling it, and she was actually giving special comments. And because she knows Melbourne, obviously, it's a really interesting insight about the D's and the club, and just some of the players to watch. De Clace looks fantastic. He looks like a beautiful kick of the footy. And the other fellow we picked up in the mid-season draft, is it Dean Turner?
Turner, yeah.
Turner, he looks a natural footballer. He's playing that sort of May role almost, isn't he? He plays like a sort of strong defender. I thought Smith had a great game. I've still got a lot of hopes for him. He was easily one of the best players. And then they had poor old Sam Wiedemann must be thinking what's going on. The young player from Cranbourne, whose name escapes me, but kicked 6 goals and
started with E, wasn't it? Elliston, yeah.
Elliston.
We
must have been looking at him going, "Come on, kid, what are you doing?"
In his 4th game,
hadn't kicked the goal up to that point. Kicked 6.
Yeah.
So they had some of those players looking pretty good, I thought.
Just some fixturing news. Well, it's not breaking news, but it's we will be playing a round 19 fixture against the Gold Coast, not on the Gold Coast, but in Darwin. So what are your thoughts on that, Adam?
Well, it's a bit of a spit in the face that we lost $800,000 not being able to play our home game in the Alice Springs. Now we've got to still go back to the Northern Territory. I hope the Gold Coast Suns aren't getting an absolute fortune for this, because I think that money just goes straight back into the AFL pockets anyway. Look, it shouldn't be an issue. We have got a pretty good record against them at Carrara, so it would have been all right to play there. Shouldn't be an issue if we're good enough, and we should be good enough. It's more the after that, what happens, whether we play the Dogs on the Friday night or the Saturday sometime, or the Sunday afternoon sort of 3 o'clock slot. It just all depends there. That's what I'll be looking for, what the results are coming out of this game. So maybe that's the point where they're going to maybe rest a couple of people, try some things. Like I don't think we've ever earned the right to be arrogant at selection and start, resting players. But that could be the time they do it, going into a potentially top 4, top 2, top 1 shaping game the week after.
It'd be top 2 most likely. But how can they play that on a Sunday afternoon at 3 o'clock?
Yeah.
I reckon that's a really good point. It'd be interesting to see what they do. They have clearly, Goody has made a sort of flag in the ground about that respect thing of not changing teams and resting. And but if you're going to do it, would be a good weekend, even if it means that we lose that game, because that's a big flight, isn't it? I think that's a longer flight to Darwin than it is to Perth. I think I read someone said on Demonland. And
depends which way the wind's blowing.
Yeah, right. Okay, but that's a tiring trip up there. And, I love this time every year in Demonland when people confuse the weather conditions in Darwin and Alice Springs. It is, it'll definitely be humid up there at that time of year. I'm assuming so. It is a draining trip, and it's sort of got a little bit of scary sort of memories of Cairns, doesn't it?
Yes, correct. The tropics are not our friends.
Yeah, so I'd be, and also, like, there is some logic, say, a Cozzy or a Jackson in the sort of slippery conditions, to bring some of those players who have played at Casey well, to give them, because if you suddenly need them in finals, it might be helpful for them to at least have, Super Mercado, you mentioned Petty coming in for that Hawthorn game. That was important, because when he did come in, he'd already had his game of AFL footy for the season. And, someone like a Chandler might come in for a Cozzy, or even Dorr coming in for, not Max probably won't want to not travel, but, to give some of those players a hit out in case they're needed in finals.
Yeah. Yeah. And look, I couldn't see them doing – I can't see them doing any, but I could see them doing maybe 1 or 2 max.
Yeah.
They wouldn't want to. You don't want to flag to Gold Coast, who, like you just said, are playing in good form. You wouldn't want to flag to them like we're taking you easily.
Yeah,
and then have them hit us on the break, even though it may not actually end up being a big issue in the end. You'd hate to mess with the form.
That's right. Now it's our turn to make smarmy jokes about other teams having their grand final when they play us.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's hard to argue this year.
Is this a Saturday night game, Andy?
This is a Saturday night game, correct?
Yeah, so that's the one positive. Again, we've been given a prime time game, so even if we don't get a financial advantage directly out of it, our sponsors will be very happy about it as well.
Yeah.
And they would have been thrilled about the Port game, George. Surely that was, standalone Thursday night. I'm not sure about, if that's bigger than a Friday night game, but, it would have got pretty good numbers, I would have thought.
Yeah.
Because they don't let Brian Taylor on the call.
That's
instantly improves any game commentary.
The other thing. So, does anyone know in terms of ticketing? They haven't mentioned anything for this week's game.
There was
tomorrow 1 o'clock is the club members one.
No, they're saying. I think it's. That there was someone that said the MCC's at 9 o'clock. So I'd imagine that's right. The reserve seats will be at 1 o'clock, and probably the same arrangements as the previous time. Level 1 members at 3 o'clock or something like that.
Yep, that's correct. I'm on it now.
And crowd? What's the crowd? Because I've got to get up the top of the pots, but I can't.
No, it's not. It won't happen. I'm with you. Yeah, as you know, there's nothing I want more than to go back. I've not been there since we lost to Collingwood at the end of 2019 and Oscar McDonald kicked a goal. I'm dying to get back to the top of that stand, but I don't think.
The last time I was there, the D's flogged Hawthorn, so.
Yeah, that was the day where I realised you could get up there, but I was stuck in the other side of the ground, and it was like trying to cross the Berlin Wall to get from one stand to the other. So I couldn't get. I even tried to go out and scan back in at the Ponce, but it didn't work. So sorry, this is all. If Brett Sutton's listening, no, I didn't do that, but I thought about it.
I want to know what you two blokes are doing up the top of the Ponsford stand on your own.
Enjoying the serenity. I like it because it's like when you see behind the goals footage. It's like watching the whole game from behind the goals footage. It's not just the lack of other people for me. I just think you just get a really good view. You can see stuff happening 30 seconds before it actually does happen. So I love it. I used to sit in that middle level on that before they made that like a reserve seat, more expensive area. And then just slowly, gradually moved towards the back the older I got and the more I wanted to be away from people.
Yeah, it's good if you've got access to the Hubble telescope to be able to see what's actually happening. I reckon it's way too far away. You guys mentioned the $800,000 from the Northern Territory that we've missed out on. Do you think there's any chance any of our remaining home fixtures, which is obviously not this week and probably almost certainly not the Bulldogs game, could they possibly slip in that Adelaide one, which is smack in between a trip to Perth and a trip down to Geelong? Surely they're not going to try and make that up.
One, we would have been screwed anyway, but I'm surprised that didn't get announced to be played there.
Yeah, I agree.
It wouldn't have happened because of the COVID outbreaks, but that would have been the one to play, and we might have got a better result.
Yeah, we might have won it.
Yeah.
Agreed. All right, boys. I think that's where we're going to end it up. It's been a long one. Thank you to Super Mikado. Adam can grab his book, The Last Hurrah, where all good books are sold. Go to his website, demonblog.com, and you can click on the links to find that. Please help support a diehard Demon fan.
Thank you.
And, we'll be back next week. Go those Demons.
Go Red Legs.
Come on, Demons. Come on, Demons. Come on, Demons. Come on, Demons. Come on, come on, come on, come on, Demons. I've got this feeling, I know it's real, it's got a hold